Hi, everybody. My name is Deanna Lozano, and I want to talk about PTSD and the 4th of July. Many of our soldiers who suffer from PTSD as a combat veteran have a hard time around 4th of July and many of the other holidays where people set off fireworks. And I'm going to share my personal story with you so that hopefully it'll help you understand PTSD a little bit better. And maybe you'll take this into consideration when setting off fireworks in your neighborhood. 5 years ago, on April 23rd, my husband went into a rage over the ice maker in our refrigerator being broken. And as a result of that, he walked into the bedroom and he put a gun in his mouth and he took his life. I will go more into that at another time in the hopes of helping people who are either dealing with suicide or who have thought about suicide. But what I want to say about that is please choose to live and find someone to talk to. Getting back to the PTSD part of this situation, so on April 23rd, after he committed suicide, shortly after that, I started with the symptoms of PTSD. I want to say it was a couple of days when the shock wore off. And in order to understand PTSD, you need to understand what happens. So I'm going to share with you the feeling that takes place in a PTSD episode for me. I don't know if this is the same for every soldier, but I've heard many stories and they share this same feeling. When you have PTSD and you are in an episode, there is this visceral reaction that happens to your environment. And whether it's someone being confrontational, a firework display, a backfire on a car, a situation where you're driving and there's a dead deer on the road, going into a grocery store or even a crowded bar. This feeling starts in your diaphragm. It is I call it a boiling. And because it feels like something is boiling inside of you. And then all of a sudden it goes into your spine and up in your entire body. And you are shaking, and you might not be shaking on the outside, but you are shaking on the inside. And then you either lash out, or you go into a flashback, or you withdraw into a cocoon. But whatever the situation is, I want you to understand that PTSD is a mind fuck. Yep, I said it. And I say that because you don't realize in here what's happening until you recognize in here what's happening. And when you can get the two together, you can learn how to control the PTSD, flashbacks, visceral reactions, conflict, fight or flight. You might hear people say fight or flight. And what you need to understand is that when this is happening, when PTSD symptoms are arising, this visceral reaction that you feel is not a conscious feeling. It's not up here. It is a reaction. I've had people who have been very confrontational with me. In one particular instance, I'm reminded of this female who accused me of touching her boyfriend. And I never put my hands on him. I simply put my hand up to keep him from bumping into me. And she got very confrontational, and I tried to walk away, and she followed me and kept yelling, and I could feel the boiling. And I kept trying to get away because I knew that if I exploded, if it boiled throughout my body, that it was going to regurgitate all over her. And so, and it did, because she wouldn't leave me alone. And what I can tell you about people who have PTSD is you do not want to be confrontational with them. If you have something to say, whether you're in a relationship with someone, or you have a child who has PTSD, or you have a family member, or you have a friend, whatever it is, you do not want to be in a confrontational situation with them. If they feel defensive and they walk away, let them walk away. This girl would not stop, and she didn't know that I had PTSD. She didn't know me from Adam, which is another reason why she should have shut her mouth, but she didn't. And so then there was this pack mentality. She got a girlfriend involved, and they started coming at me from both sides. And I leapt over a stool, and I swung at her. And I would have hit her if it hadn't been for a friend of mine who grabbed me around my waist and dragged me outside. And that happened twice. And I'm not saying that all reactions are violent, but you might have someone who screams, who punches something, who tightens their body. These are all parts of PTSD, because confrontation, it does something to us. And it's different. It's different than if you're getting into an argument with someone. It's different if someone says to you, why are you in a bad mood? Confrontation and PTSD don't go together. The same thing with things like backfire, fireworks. I remember the first time that I heard fireworks after Wayne died. I started feeling anxious. I put my headphones on like everybody told me. I blasted the music. I had taken one of my trazodone that they had put me on to remain calm. And it didn't matter. I could still hear them. I could feel them. And my anxiety level and this boiling was happening, and I couldn't stop it. And the next thing I know, and it was probably 20 minutes later, I was on the floor, and mind you, I was on my sofa. I was on the floor in my bedroom where my husband took his life, and I had blood on my hands, and I was screaming and crying. So what had happened was the fireworks sent me into a flashback. Now let me tell you that when my husband committed suicide, he put the gun in his mouth, which created a muzzled sound. I did not know this until after, when the police officer explained it to me, but he told me that it's sort of like putting a silencer, because I thought I heard a balloon pop. And if a gun were going off, then it should have sounded like that, out in the wild, shooting a deer, but it didn't. It sounded like a balloon pop. And when I walked into the bedroom, all I saw was blood. And I tried to save him, so therefore I put my hand on top of his head and I put my fingers in his mouth. I had blood everywhere. The reality is that no matter what I did, no matter how I tried to soothe myself, no matter how I tried to stay in the moment, it was so soon after he committed suicide, and I still didn't understand the symptoms of PTSD. And so it was constantly happening to me. I still don't like to go into a crowded business. I can be outside with a crowd. I feel more secure, but that is not the case with a lot of soldiers, combat veterans who go into crowded situations. Many times what happens is they will avoid going into crowds. They will avoid going into businesses. Many don't even like to go to restaurants. You'll often hear soldiers say, or men say, I want to be facing the door. I want to be facing, the center of the restaurant. And that is because they need to assess their environment. They need to, in their mind, know that if there is a risk, they have control. They want to be able to see the door so they can see who comes in and who goes out. And a lot of police officers are like this too. But they don't want to put themselves in crowded situations where they cannot control their environment. And so that can set off PTSD if all of a sudden they are in a crowded environment. And maybe in a lot of situations, I know for me, I didn't realize that crowds were going to be a big deal for me until I was actually in one. And then I started having anxiety and I had to get out. And I want you to understand that when this visceral reaction, when this boiling happens, if we cannot remove ourselves from the situation, it feels like we have 100 pounds of clothes on in 115 degree weather. You got to get out. You got to get out. I got to get out. It's a panic that you might not see on the outside, but it is happening on the inside. And so then there was another time when I was driving, and understand that when my flashbacks happen, I lose time. I lost, like I said, 25 minutes the first time I had a flashback. And then the next time I had a flashback, I was actually driving and I saw a dead deer on the road, and the blood evidently was the trigger for me. And I say evidently because remember, at this time, I was learning about PTSD. I was experiencing it, not reading about it. It was happening. And so I was driving, and I don't know how I managed to keep driving and somehow pull off the side of the road. But I came out of my flashback, and there I was in my car. And I was on the side of the road, thank God. So these things, coupled with the lack of sleep, because I was having night terrors, I would wake up several times in the middle of the night and in a panic. I think I suffered from sleep deprivation for about 3 years while I was trying to learn about my PTSD, and I was trying to figure out ways how to manage my PTSD, because you don't control PTSD and you don't deal with PTSD, you manage PTSD. So one year, my friends decided that they were going to take me camping up in the mountains away from the fireworks. Yeah, that didn't happen because mountain people still like fireworks. And so we set up at this campsite, and a bunch of kids were throwing these little, fireworks, not the big ones, but the little ones that pop. And I went into a flashback. There was a soldier that was right next door in another tent, and he heard me. And he and my then ex-husband, now ex-husband, went and tried to find the children, and then found the police. And it was illegal for them to be setting off these fireworks, so the police officers asked them to stop. But what the soldier told me later was that when they asked them to stop, they laughed at them. And he told him that he was a combat veteran, and that disgusted me. That angered me beyond belief. Because what I need you to understand for soldiers is that many combat veterans might be new in their PTSD and maybe just learning about PTSD and have not been able to manage their PTSD. And you setting off fireworks in your neighborhood can really damage them. And isn't it ironic that one of the things that we use to celebrate our independence and to celebrate our soldiers is one thing that damages them beyond recognition when they're not prepared or when they're trying to learn how to manage their PTSD. You'll see that there are signs that veterans can get. And I encourage you, if you are a veteran, I encourage you, if you are someone who is dealing with PTSD, I encourage you, if you have a family member that is dealing with PTSD, to get one of those signs and put it in their yard. And I encourage you as neighbors and family and friends of someone likely suffering from PTSD to check on them and to look at your neighbors and say, listen, I noticed that you serve. Do you have PTSD? If they do, they're going to tell you. Fireworks are very detrimental and in some cases can do irreparable damage. If you think about the fight or flight and you think about the situation that I previously described, you'll understand that in a situation where you're having a flashback, oftentimes family members can be injured because the soldier or the person in PTSD does not understand and does not know they're not in a combat situation or they're not in that moment. It is very hard for them to get themselves back into the present so that they can recognize and calm themselves and figure out a way to get through this. And I encourage you that, again, if you know someone who is suffering from PTSD, to please help them find help. Oftentimes, because the PTSD is so bad, and I will say this from the soldiers that the combat veterans that I've talked to, including my son, that there's a tremendous amount of guilt associated with the combat veteran that has served in a war zone, because maybe they've had to take lives that, in a normal situation, obviously they wouldn't take. And there is also guilt associated with the fact that they may have lost a brother or sister or several brothers and sisters in a war zone. And they are suffering from survivor's guilt. There is also the stigma of mental illness that goes along with PTSD. And in several states, if you are diagnosed with mental illness, you can no longer carry a firearm, which means that the one thing that they might love to do is to go hunting, and they can no longer own firearms. And they cannot feel like they can protect their family. And then there's also the don't talk about it stigma that comes from the military. I know when I got my husband's military records, because he was a Marine, many of his records were redacted. And I remember asking him questions and he was, I don't want to talk about it. So understand that there is a lot of difficulty associated with being a combat veteran and trying to deal with PTSD, trying to manage PTSD, trying to get help for PTSD. But what I can tell you is that there are ways to treat it, and some of them are not conventional. And I encourage you to seek help. You can Google veterans programs. You can Google veterans organizations that do offer help. And again, like I said, please make sure that if you have a combat veteran living in your neighborhood, that you are not the one that is setting off fireworks. Go to a field somewhere. Go to a parking lot somewhere. Do anything else. But be mindful that your celebration could be hurting someone else. And our combat veterans deserve much more than that and deserve better than that. If you are a combat veteran or any veteran or soldier that is serving, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. You are loved and appreciated. and you can get through PTSD. And at a later date, I will post a video regarding my PTSD and some of the things that I did to get through it and to manage it. I'm doing much better now, and I think that I may be able to help in one way or another, either guide you or figure out an organization that might be able to help you in your area. So if you have any questions or you have anything that you want to post, please feel free and share my video, as it might help someone that has PTSD. Thank you, and have a good day.